Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a chat with Matt. Thank you for everybody who checked out last week's episode. And this episode is once again sponsored by Anchor. So thank you to Anchor for sponsoring the podcast. Today, I'm joined by entertainment lawyer, president of SaskMusic, drummer for One Bad Son. Is there something you don't do that I'm missing? Do you fly planes? Are you an astronaut? Like what? Kurt Dahl, ladies and gentlemen.
I don't sing backups very good, or leads for that matter.
Okay, good. Something we found that you can't do well. I'm guessing that list is shorter. So, Kurt, yeah, talk to me about like everything you have going on because you are one busy motherfucker, honestly.
Thanks, Matt. Well, thanks for having me, dude. It's an honor. And you and I met years ago. I think we'll get into that more later.
Yeah.
But so it's been cool to see all the things you've been doing, and yeah, it's an honor to be on the show. So, yeah, man, things are busy. I mean, it's a weird time to be busy because it's this gong show of a pandemic. But the music biz is, as you know very well, like it still rolls on, right? And I'm super lucky to, whatever. I mean, I get to work with some of the best artists out there as their lawyer, and almost all of the artists you've had, the musicians you've had on your show are my clients, which is like, it means you've got great taste in guests, and also means I'm super lucky to have awesome people to work with,
And it comes full circle now that you're here.
Yeah, exactly. But no, things are good, man. And we can talk about this stuff more later, but yeah, like I launched a management company last year, which towards the end of the year, which was not really something I planned to do anytime soon, but the right person came to me, the right producer, and said, I need a manager. Would you do it? So sometimes you just got to go with your gut instinct in this business, and so, yeah, that's what I did.
What made you want to get into management?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think I've always thought that I would do that later in life, when I'm a bit older and look like more like a manager, like when I start to have gray hair and get a bit larger in the midsection,
Yep. I'm already there. I'm great. No.
You'd be a great manager. I don't know. It's like, so I guess, and so Brian Moncars is the producer mixer that I manage. And he was like, we just got to know each other just right before COVID hit. And I was in Toronto, and he's like, hey, you are a lawyer for a bunch of the bands I produce. Let's go for beers. And so we went for beers and tacos and just like hit it off. When you, in this business, there's like some of the most amazing people in the world. And I would say Moncars is one of them, just a good guy who's also like crazy talented. Like he's just finished mixing like the new Alice Cooper album. And, it's like, it's kind of crazy. So I just hit it off on a personal level, had no intention to like manage him or anything like that. And then we just kept in touch, kept doing phone calls after the fact, just shooting the shit about the music biz and whatever rock bands or we're into. And then he's like, I'm just not happy with my manager. And I hear that often from artists, it's like, or their label, they're not happy with or whatever. Right. And I always say, well, with any relationship, if you're not happy, you got to like do something about it. Otherwise it's just going to stay the same, And so bottom line, after a few calls, he's like, I want to fire my manager, but only if you'll manage me. So I was like, holy shit. I mean, I hadn't thought of that. So it took me about a total of 10 minutes to think about it, chat with my wife. And then I was like, let's do it, man. So
I mean, for you got a hell of a first client if you got Moncars on the list.
Yeah, he's a good guy, man. And that, it's like, I think right now I'm only going to focus on like managing producers and mixers because I feel like it's in my wheelhouse. Like I'm always, as an entertainment lawyer, I'm always negotiating, producer deals either for producers or for artists, right? So I feel like that's sort of an easier step into easier to wade into the water managing producers and mixers. Whereas like managing artists, like it's a whole, I wouldn't be so naive to think that I can just all of a sudden start doing that, like maybe down the road, but artists take more, especially when you're touring and stuff, when touring kicks back up again, like there's a lot to manage. Right. And right now the law practice is like just a bit too busy, and I got 3 young kids. So it's like, I'm doing my own managing around the house,
And once again, I have to touch on the fact that you're doing all this shit and you have three kids. Like that in itself is one kid is a full time job, let alone three. Like you gotta have a solid base at home to pull all this off.
That's my wife for sure, man. She's the real one in charge, and she takes care of four kids if you count me. Um, but I guess I would say that like being in a rock band for 17 years, I basically was like taking care of three other kids anyways.
Were you the dad of the group on the road?
No, I was, we always we would take turns. Um, that was the cool thing about OBS and still is, it's like some nights, one or two of the guys would just, let loose and the other two wouldn't or whatever, right? Like we'd always the dad role was rotating.
Well, I think that's good to have, especially in a group of guys, especially when you've been together that long, going out for that long. So what is going on with OBS? Because I know with COVID, obviously, you guys were pretty well known as a hard rock and road band. So it's just like what's been biggest adjustment in the camp for COVID?
Yeah, that's the tough thing. I mean, we loved going on the road, and like that was, I feel like we earned every fan the old fashioned way by playing shows, and like we didn't have any like shortcuts through the 16 years plus we've been doing it. So I miss that going on the road and just those connections with fans. Like you realize it's more than just the music, right? Like it actually is something bigger there, where you end up becoming friends with like so many of the fans, and um, there is that real human connection. So, I mean, since COVID, it's hit, it's been tough because, Hicks and I are in Saskatoon, but Shane is in Calgary. So, we can't get together and sort of socially distant jam sort of thing. Um, so, I mean, we're always sending ideas back and forth like individually, but we haven't had like the collective jams, for, well, since COVID hit. So that's a bummer. But I'm a firm believer that when the right song hits, it just you can't stop it, right? And I think we've got many of those songs left in us, and so we'll see what happens as soon as everyone gets the needle in the arm, we can start doing this again.
No, absolutely. And just seeing that you guys have gone on for this long and you're still going is monumental, especially in a Canadian industry, because with the Canadian industry being such a small fraction of the global market and still seeing bands having this much longevity, it's not very common now. Like I imagine, especially on your end, on the lawyer side, you see so many bands come and go in such a small window of time.
Yeah, I read something. It's like your average lifespan of a band is like 10 months or something like that. Like when you factor in all the, which is just crazy. I mean, yeah, we've there's been ups and downs for sure, and it is like a family where like sometimes you have your fights, whatever, but you come back to the family, and um, yeah, I mean, I look forward to writing songs again with those guys and getting on stage. I mean, that was always like I've played music on stage since I was like just you know well in my early teens, so you really miss that feeding off the crowd, you know.
And what aspect of the band life do you look back on fondly over this like 17-year window? Any moments stand out?
Yeah, there's lots, man. I mean, we could write a book. Um, I think one of the big ones. Well, I always like to compare it. It's all about that juxtaposition. Like we did that show, on the same bill as the Rolling Stones. In your neck of the woods, and it was like whatever they said it was like 80,000 people or something like that. Like it was just nuts, right? And being a longtime Stones fan, like that was huge, right? And I like to juxtapose that with like the early days when we'd go and the early memories we had. Like we'd tour, we'd drive, 30 hours, 40 hours to like whatever, Thunder Bay to play in front of like literally 15 people if we were lucky. And we loved that we got 15 people. That's 13 more than the last time, um, and we play and no one gave a shit. Like the crowd was like, they wanted covers, they wanted us, they thought we were a cover band. We show up, we're playing like 95% original with like a Metallica cover thrown in. and they I wouldn't say they hated us. They really didn't like us, but we didn't care. It was like, that's when we looked to each other, looked inwards, and, basically like played to each other. Right. And, we did that for years. And those memories, like when no one cared, when no one gave a shit, when no one was asking us to be on their podcasts, like, those days, I kind of look back really fondly on, because again, it was just us against the world. Right. And, all you have in those moments or those years is sort of your belief in yourself. And I think, as with anything, those are the moments that really define you.
I always like to ask this kind of hypothetical question for guys in your position that wear the multiple hats and do 500 different things. If you had to only do one, and I'm sure you've thought about this hypothetical, because I know I've thought about this hypothetical, what would be the one thing you would always go back towards?
So, like, one thing in my current life, I mean,
Mm.
that's
The
really tough.
band, the legal stuff. If you had to only pursue one.
Well, the answer is easy if we're allowed to factor in the family part.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Like,
obviously, we're not going to put the family because we already know the answer to that one. But everything else, like the SaskMusic, the lawyer stuff, your management, OBS, like out of all
yeah.
those things, what's the one thing that you think you would go with if you had to choose?
Well, I think, the answer really, and it's a very hypothetical question indeed.
Indeed.
The answer is, like, at the heart of it, the thing that connects them all is music, right? Like, that's without music, without me being a musician, I wouldn't have any of these things, right? Like, that's what sort of, I didn't go into law school thinking I'd be like a regular lawyer. Like, a lot of my classmates were like children of lawyers, or like they're like fourth generation lawyers. They knew from age 6 they're going to be a lawyer. That was not me. I went into law school because I read way too many rock and roll biographies growing up, and all of my idols got screwed over by someone in a suit. They got screwed over by a contract. So I wanted to make sure that I wanted to become the lawyer that saved my fellow musicians from getting ripped off by, the business world in the music biz. Right. So again, it was just me as a music fan going into law school and wanting to, like, make a difference, and so I guess to answer your question, like, being a musician is kind of the thing that goes through it all, right? Even as manager, even as SaskMusic. So, if Kurt Dahl wasn't a musician, he wouldn't be doing any of the other things.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I I want to touch on the law stuff because it's such a broad spectrum, and I see stuff you're going all the time, and there's a lot going on, and you're going to all the news stations and talking about different legal cases and stuff like that involving copyright. Talk to me about the background. Like, what was there a specific moment that kind of made you want to get into law? You mentioned reading a lot of those biographies. Was there any sort of particular piece that you read that made you really want to dive into that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, so I read all these biographies, like everyone from like Leonard Cohen to Willie Nelson to, all the black musicians. They got exploited the worst, which is especially in the early rock and roll, early blues. Like, I mean, this is the story of America, really. But it's never more noticeable than in the music biz, right? So all those biographies made me just realize that there is a lot of snakes out there in the music biz, in the business world in general, whether it's music or otherwise. So, anyways, that got me into law school. I went, wrote the LSAT, did surprisingly well on it, like, to my surprise. And let's do this. Let's go to law school. Went to law school, realized that they weren't teaching entertainment law, at least not where I went. So then I graduated law school and realized I didn't want to become a lawyer right now. Everyone else went and became a lawyer. And that's when OBS was like getting off the ground. It was 2005. So OBS was 1 year old. So I had the idea or the audacity to think, let's just go tour the country and become rock stars. Unfortunately, the timing wasn't there for us yet. We weren't that good. We didn't have any hit songs in 2005. So we toured the country, like I said, to Thunder Bay to play for 15 people and, like a case of beer, and the occasional heckler. We did that for like another 3 years. And around that time is when, as you probably remember, I mean, the whole Napster and LimeWire, like like illegal downloading thing happened. And that's when I realized something's happening here, where the law and music are intersecting, right? Everyone's saying that the music industry is falling apart because of downloading, and we have to put the genie back in the bottle. We have to get people buying, $25 CDs again. And I just thought like that's when sort of the light bulb went off. Like this could be something cool to combine law and music. And then I decided to do a master's in law thesis on that topic. Like, where's the music biz heading? How will musicians make money in the future if people aren't buying music anymore? And then from there, it was just like the fire was lit, and I was like, let's do this. Did the master's, and while I'm at it, let's become a lawyer finally, and become an entertainment lawyer, and you know, the rest is history.
How accurate was that thesis from back then? How much do you think actually carried over to what it is now?
Well, I'll send it to you. It's a long read, but
I would love to read it.
Yeah, yeah. Surprisingly, like at least to me, a lot of it was fairly accurate. Like it still is today. I mean, and it wasn't like I was, inventing amazing or like coming up with crazy predictions. Like what I predicted, and also I to my or like to not give myself too much credit. It's like I was living it as a band. I could see these things happening, so it was just a matter of putting it in paper. So I could see that people were stopping buying CDs. Like it wasn't the writing wasn't on the wall fully to most people at that point, but to me it was. Like I knew people weren't going to buy CDs anymore. I mean, with exception, I still buy CDs once in a while, and I buy a lot of vinyl, but that's sort of an exception, I guess. But you know, one of the main predictions was most of your income as a musician is going to come from touring. And I think that's a huge, most musicians would agree with that now, right? And that's why COVID is such a bummer, right? You can't go out there and make a living. And then I predicted that, major labels would continue to have less and less power, and more mid-sized labels would come into the market, which has very much happened. I mean, sometimes the majors buy them up, and so they're still holding on to the power, but I mean, there was a time in the 90s or 80s when the majors just owned everything, right? I think that's starting to change. And then I guess the final prediction was that there'd be some sort of way to consume music without buying it. And it'd just be kind of like you just pay for it like you pay for your water bill every month. And so that's the analogy I used in the thesis. It'd be like music like water. And that's to me kind of what Spotify is. I mean, $10 a month, that's probably less than you pay for your water bill. And that's what it is now, right? For better or worse.
Yeah, no, you definitely nailed the head on the head with the subscription platform, and that's continually growing into different things and allowing musicians to not only, because yes, we don't have the live music anymore to make the money from there, but we see artists developing online personas, online content creation, Patreon, OnlyFans, etc., stuff like that. What do you think of that subscription model, like with the Patreon and the OnlyFans? Do you think something like that will carry on down the line, or is there going to be like some sort of new evolution of it?
Yeah, that's a good question, Matt. I mean, I think at the end of the day, people like what they want from musicians is something that they can't get anywhere else, right? Like that a live show to me is like sums that up, right? Like when you and I are in the front row drinking a beer and a band is just slaying it on stage, like that experience, like you can't replicate that like digitally, at least not in my opinion, right? Like it's not the same when you're watching a band on Zoom or something or whatever. Um, and that's kind of with the OnlyFans or whatever. Like, when you're offering something to your fans that only the band can offer, there's value there. Like if Springsteen, I'm a Boss fan. If he was like, I'm gonna write a song for you, and for your family or something, I'd like to me that's like priceless, right? Or I'm gonna send a private video to you wishing you happy birthday or something. I mean, and that's the whole cameo stuff, right? I mean, I think musicians have to be adaptable and be aware of the fact that what they offer is so unique, and there's value in that, right? So I think to your question, I mean, how that is communicated or sold to fans, I think will evolve over time, but there is something special there, man. Like if there is something magical about the right song played by the right person, and there's musicians should be paid well for that, you know.
And speaking of musicians being paid well and tying it back to Spotify, obviously with Spotify, it's that money to water kind of ratio you predicted in your thesis. What are your thoughts on the royalty payouts for Spotify and all these streaming platforms?
I think they're horrible. I think musicians should be paid more. I think it's interesting. Like, how do we get more higher payouts from Spotify for musicians? Is it charging the end user more? Like you and I have our Spotify accounts. Like, should we be paying more than $10 a month? Maybe that's part of it, but I think it's also like, you see, like, what is the value of Spotify's company, right? Like, it gets valued at what, like several billion. So to me, there's a disconnect there, and a lot of it is the difference between the tech world and the music world. Like, all these tech companies are worth billions, and the people behind them are making millions, but at the core of their business model is music, and the musicians, the songs they're using, they're paying pennies, less than pennies for, right? So to me, the tech companies are making a killing off the music industry, and to me, that's just not right. There's a disconnect there. There needs to be some sort of correction, or like a market correction. But I mean, I don't know enough about that to, like, what does that correction look like, and how do we go about getting it? I mean, is it a matter of, taking down the big tech giants? That's a big question.
And the other thing is, Spotify also recently announced that they're going to be working on a program in which artists can opt to receive even less of a payment, so even smaller than a fraction of a penny, whatever it is, in order to potentially boost their exposure. Well, what are your thoughts on that kind of concept?
Again, it's garbage. I mean, like, and I know, yeah, it was like the head of Spotify, whatever, said, artists should be releasing like a song every week or something, and just the devaluing of music I have a real issue with. And I get, if you're Beyonce or whatever, I mean, if you're the top artist, um, you get paid well from Spotify. So it's like the top, whatever it is. I think it's the top 3 or 4% make 90% of the money. I mean, I don't know the numbers, but it's, we could easily Google that. Um, it's sort of like the age old thing of, like, the rich get richer and the poor just struggle for the scraps. And um, to me, there's something needs to be fixed there. And again, this would be like a good second thesis, or someone else who's got more, who's younger than me should go write a thesis on this. Um, yeah, what is the right fix in terms of streaming payouts to artists? Because to me, if you get, like OBS, we've got a few million streams or something, or more, maybe, I don't know, but um, we made like literally a few dollars. Like, it'd be a couple Starbucks coffees, for several million streams. Which, I mean, to me, that's not even speaking like selfishly. It's just from a theoretical standpoint, it doesn't seem right.
And that's the thing. It's kind of a question of where is evolution going to go in terms of music, because we went from Napster, a time where the industry didn't want everyone to switch to downloading singles for 99 cents, to now streaming music free whenever you want through a variety of different platforms, or for a premium subscription if you don't want to listen to ads. And the thing is, I don't think anyone really knows where to go. And it kind of, you can translate that also to the live market, in which we're seeing these onslaught of live shows, we're seeing the onslaught of drive-in shows, and obviously with COVID and everything, we don't know where it's going to go. So I, I don't know, man. It's just it's a difficult time, and I think the tech giants aren't going to recognize the devaluing of music because they're so focused on the black line on their end.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I would guess that Daniel Eck and the people that are in charge of these companies see that they're actually providing a great service to artists. And I guess in some ways there is, there obviously is benefits to being on Spotify, whatever, right? Like, that goes without saying. Um, it's just the payouts are so low, right? So yeah, I think this is probably the most important issue facing the music biz right now is, you know, what is a fair, payment system in terms of streaming for artists?
And hopefully someone will write that thesis and figure it out, because it certainly won't be me. I'm definitely not smart enough to write that kind of shit. So
I
basically,
debate that.
well, I'm just good at talking. I'm good at bullshit. Fake it till you make it. Uh, Kurt, I want to ask about, you mentioned obviously dealing with the snakes of the industry and stuff like that. I'm curious, dealing with the people that you're dealing with now, whether it be on the label side, the art side, whoever it is, and you mentioned the snakes back then kind of screwing things over. Are a lot of those like people screwing those people over still the same, or is it some sort of variation of it, or is it something completely different?
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I find now is, I mean, sometimes people, you know, like a deal may not seem to be that obviously bad for an artist. Like I think, you know, like a layman's review of a contract might not reveal any red flags, but when you dig into it and actually find that they're actually, the label's taking all of this sort of digital revenue and you don't even realize it, or they're asking for too much here, or they forced you into you know, a 10-year contract when it should be a 2-year contract. I mean, these sort of things, you know, I guess they've changed. To answer your question, they've changed over the years, and the contracts have become trickier. You know, like, because once I write a blog about here's what to look out for in a record deal, then all of a sudden the next time someone from the label reads that, and then they adjust the language to sort of disguise it a bit. But it's not. I mean, there are so many great labels out there, and good people that work for labels. You know, especially in the mid-sized label range, and even with the major labels. I mean, there is some great deals out there. You got to negotiate them, right? A lot of times the first offer from a major label is going to be down here, and you got to get the right entertainment lawyer to really make it suit you as an artist and also suit your best interests, you know, like what makes sense for you, whatever, right? So but as far as the snakes, I mean, I see a lot of these sort of, it's not like the labels that are doing it, it's sort of these fly by night companies where they're like, I just want to develop you as an artist. And you look at the contract and it's like, you're basically, they're owning the songs, like the compositions, they're owning the masters, and they sort of disguise that in the language. Right. So, I mean, the music biz, the reason some of these contracts, you know, pass in the music biz and they would never pass in the regular business world is because there's always that carrot being dangled of success, right? And stardom, right? So artists will kind of trick themselves that it's all going to be worth it if they sign this deal and they'll become a star. You know, it's the star maker machinery. You know, the people just, I show some contracts to other business lawyers, and they're like, this would never fly in the business world, but somehow it flies in the music biz, right? So I think that's the key. My job is to stop the artist from wanting to sign something like that, and let's try to find a good deal from a good company or a good person, you know?
And do you think that that dangling of the carrot and success makes it's really enticing for the artist, but I think the other side of it is a lot of artists just don't know any different, and they don't, and a lot of them don't even necessarily know what an entertainment lawyer is, or if any of them really exist, because it's something that's not really as publicly pushed as a lot of people think, especially for like new developing artists who are literally just these companies, like the fly by night companies you talk about, they kind of swoop in and they, you know, the you're ready to be a star kid and just dangle the carrot and all that kind of shit. And
Yeah.
what would be essentially, I mean, besides the obvious of get a lawyer, like what if someone hypothetically like, couldn't afford a lawyer or whatever it is, like what would be some of the advice you would give those artists who are getting their first indie label contract or mid-size label or even management, anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, if a contract's put in front of you, like, you got to try to get it looked at by a lawyer. And again, sometimes, yeah, I guess I would say that, you know, it might cost less than people would think, you know, or there's ways that we can, like, sometimes an artist will send me a contract and be like, can you negotiate this for me? And I'll say, okay, well, here's what it'll be. And they're like, well, you know, if if they can't, if they say I have $0 to spend on something, I'll say, well, like, I just recommend you don't sign this, you know, like this, because there is some red flags. And but bottom line is, like, reach out to me, or you know, there's a handful of us or more in the country, probably 10 of us in the country that do this all the time. Reach out and just get an opinion. And you may not even pay to have it negotiated, but like get an opinion on it, because it could make, I've seen it, like it can make the difference between a successful career and a not successful one. Like I've had artists come to me and say, I signed this deal, can you help me with it now? And it's like the contract's already signed, and they want out, of course. Now they realize they should have spent the money to get it negotiated. At the end of the day, like if you're not prepared to invest in your career, I don't know if this is the right industry for you, right? And again, it's a matter of like spending this much now to say, or this much down the road, right? When there's success, that's when all of a sudden the contract becomes, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I've seen it happen time and time again. But the fun stuff, the fun negotiating is when the artist has got some hype and there's people are interested, and then I can negotiate like a killer deal for an artist. And, I just did this a few months ago, like made an artist like a millionaire overnight, and once they put pen to paper, like they've literally got 7 figures in their bank account, and it's like, those are always special moments.
What do you think some of the biggest red flags that have popped up in some of these contracts you've seen, especially in the past recent years?
A lot of them are, it is sort of this like artist development thing where it's because, a major label, they're not likely going to put in a clause that's like totally like a holy shit red flag clause. Cause they could get in a lot of trouble for that. And someone could screenshot it and make it public knowledge, and then they'd be in a lot of trouble. Where it's these smaller companies, or it may not be a company, it could just be like a single person, and they're going to offer you, they're going to develop you as an artist. But if they get you a record deal, then you have to give them 50% of whatever money you make under the record deal or something like that, right? And so then you're, in a major label, or oftentimes the label will take more than half, right? And then whatever you get from that, and you have to give half of that to this developer. It just ends up that there's nothing left in the pie, But yeah, I mean, red flags. I mean, anytime I see publishing, you really want to get legal advice if you're giving up some of your songs, right? So in every recorded song, there's 2 copyrights, main ones anyways, one in the songwriting and then one in the recording. Record deals involve the recording, publishing deals involve the songwriting. So if you're giving up your rights in the songwriting, like that's a red flag. You should only do that if, there's an advance involved, or, you get advice on it, because the songs themselves will last, like the copyrights live for your life plus 50 to 75 years, depending on jurisdiction. So, we're talking over 100 years easily. And every time that song is played on the radio or whatever, that's generating money for the songwriter. So if you take a song like Hotel California, for example, I mean, that song, I don't know if it sells a lot in terms of records still, like actual physical records, but it's every day somewhere in the world, every minute, I'm sure it's being played somewhere, right? So it's making those writers millions of dollars every year still. So again, it just gives you an idea of how important songwriting, like publishing is. So as an artist, if you're giving up publishing, like get legal advice, because it's really important.
Yeah, I just think a lot of these younger artists, they're really getting sucked into a lot of these things, because there's a lot of those. Even now you see a lot of these promotion campaigns online about people pay me to do this, and we'll develop you this, all you need is this and this, and it's just, they're running around circles, and just it's scary to see. But it's good to know that there are guys like you that are willing to help out the little guy and really try to make a difference and just have them understand, because the biggest thing is having an understanding of not only your status but your value and your music and what you put out.
Yeah, that's a great point. And actually, that's a good example you brought up is anytime a record deal requires that you pay the label, that's a red flag. And I've seen it lots where it's like, yeah, Kurt, what do you think of this deal? And so this is a good example of, they can't afford me, but I look at it and say, do not sign this, just walk away from this. And then I don't charge them $1. And they say, thank you so much, I thought this was a good deal. And then I point out quickly, here's why it's not. And mostly it's like, sign this deal and then you have to pay us, $7,000 and we'll do all these things for you. And it's like, you should not be paying the label. It should be the other way around, right? The label should be investing in you. And so I've seen, so a couple of labels did that. They want $3,000 US on signing, and they did that with like 20 artists. So that's a lot of money for them right there. And of course, once the artist signs and sends the money, they never hear back from them, and a lot of times it's way more than $3,000. Like there was one client of mine that paid $80,000 and it's just gone. Yeah.
My God. That's just crazy. Some of the snakes in this industry, man. I'm just hoping that some of these snakes go away because of COVID.
Yeah, exactly. What was that one, like that one children's story where the guy plays the flute and all the snakes leave the town or something?
Yeah.
I don't know what it's called, but anyways, yeah. But there, I mean, and not to focus on all the negative stuff, because there is some amazing things happening, amazing people in the music biz, right? Like, but it's kind of more fun to talk about the snakes, because then it's like it's a cautionary tale,
Exactly, and that's what this podcast is. All the things you shouldn't do in the industry. I'm curious on some of your thoughts with some of these copyright cases that come out recently, like whether that be a similar sounding chord progression or a similar sounding lyric structure, or anything like that. Like,
Right.
is there any of these cases that just stand out to you as either that this makes sense or this doesn't make sense?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Like the blurred lines case was really huge and quite polarizing. I feel like a lot of people, even like on the article I wrote on it, a lot of people commented like, no, you're wrong. Check out this interview with Pharrell, where Pharrell's like, and Pharrell and Rick Rubin. And Rick Rubin's like, one of my favorite producers ever. And they both agree that it was the court decided wrong. And it's a horrible thing for musicians, because it means that, like, if you're influenced by a song, that constitutes plagiarism. And I actually disagree with them on that. Like, I think they're like, influence is a huge difference between, inspiration and plagiarism, right? I would say in the Blurred Lines case, like, it was definitely influenced, or they're inspired by Marvin Gaye's song, but it went beyond that. Like, it was the groove, like everything to me, you put them side by side, and like the groove, the feel, the vibe, all that stuff, whatever words you want to use to describe it, they're the same, and then they added new lyrics, of course. But a good chunk of it, and I guess maybe the judge, I forget what percentage of the song they said was the same, but maybe that's where there was an error. But I think that Pharrell and Robin Thicke should have reached out to the Gaye estate and say, listen, we got this song. It's based on your groove. We're willing to offer you this, Instead, I believe they preemptively sued the Gaye family, saying, just so you know, this song is not similar. And so then the Gaye family was like, well, what? And I might be getting like some of the minor details slightly off, but I believe that's my understanding. So then it's like they sort of lay down the gauntlet, and then of course the Gaye family is going to have their back up against the wall. It wasn't worth. Should they have had to pay $8 million? I wouldn't agree on that. My hope would be, in that case, that they could have reached some sort of agreement without going to court, and instead of blowing it all on lawyers, I'm actually a fan of not over lawyering things, like getting down to the truth of the matter. It could have gone so much better. So that case was interesting. And so for me as a musician myself, I mean, we've written songs where we're like, this kind of feels like a bit of a Soundgarden vibe, or this kind of feels like a Zeppelin vibe, and then it's like, it's such a fine line when you go from that to like, is it a ripoff? Right. And I find it very fascinating. I don't think that, I don't want copyright protection to go to a place where you're afraid to be creative because you're worried it's going to rip someone off. Right. Like, in a lot of ways, it's all been done, right? There's only 7 major chords and whatever. So you don't want it to go that far. It's a pendulum, right? The protection of copyrights and plagiarism is a pendulum. I would say maybe it swung a bit far with the Gaye, like the Blurred Lines case, because the judge did. But I think that, in that case, for example, like, there was definitely some of the songwriting should have gone to the Gaye estate, because to me, it's just, there's so much similarity there.
A concept that I've really talked about over the past few years, and it's a concept that a lot of people don't like when I say it, but it is kind of accurate to what you just said, which is it's the concept that there's no such thing as true original music anymore. Because, like you said, there's only 7 chords, there's only so much you can do, there's only so much variations of things, and it's that defining line of acknowledging the inspiration behind something, which is what I agree with you completely that Pharrell and Ruben and wherever else were involved should have went to the gay estate and had made some sort of arrangement or something like that. If there is that acknowledgement, as opposed to putting something out and then just trying to ignore it or push it under the rug. And it's about creating that accountability for and communication, because the thing is with music, a lot of people, especially now I've noticed, especially a lot of younger artists I talk to, they look at music as a competition. They're trying to see what this band is doing. This band is, oh, we should do something like that because that's what they're doing. But it's music isn't a competition, and it shouldn't be. It's a beautiful universal thing that we should all be able to enjoy and not have to worry about getting sued or getting or accidentally ripping someone off, especially if it's unintentional. And even if you unintentionally jack something that you didn't realize, don't be a dick about it. Just say, you know what, you're right. I can see your perspective on this.
Yeah, and that's happened a few times too, right? I think it was it I think it was the Chili Peppers and Tom Petty. Actually no, it was Tom Petty and Sam Smith.
Yes.
Like, so Sam Smith said, like, someone came to him and said, your song ripped off whichever Tom Petty song was. And so then Sam Smith said, well, I've never heard that song, which is also made me really lose a lot of respect for Sam Smith if he hadn't heard the Tom Petty song. Like, come on, man. That's the most important takeaway for me. But, so then Sam Smith's people reached out to Tom Petty's and said, hey, this is unintentional, but let's give you a percentage of this. And then Petty's people said, all right. And then Tom Petty said, which I love this, God rest his soul, like what a legend. But he was like, the press tried to make a big dramatic thing about it, saying, are you guys fighting about this, whatever? And Tom Petty's like, no, it's settled. He's like, this is hardly news. Like there's so many important things in the world you should be covering, not this. Okay. So find something better to focus on, which I just like Tom Petty,
What do you think is the factor that makes these cases blow up? Is it the fact that it's high profile people and they're trying to generate clicks, or do you think there's an actual genuine public interest in this? Because I don't think a majority of the public really give a shit about if a song kind of sounds like another one.
Yeah, good question. I find it fascinating, but yeah, maybe I'm not the norm. But yeah, I think you're right. Like, part of it is it's like the classic, we live in an era where it's like breaking news, and I'm not a fan of that whole, just that world of like, watching news all day and just like waiting for the breaking news. And that was a big, obviously Trump didn't help with all that stuff, but I think you're right. It's probably like just it makes for good press fodder. And then I think it is sort of fascinating to a lot of people, like, because that's the great thing about music. It's like, it's hard to say why a certain song like makes your arm hairs stand up, every time you hear it. And it's like, it is that magic, right? When I hear Freddie Mercury, like, hit a high note, I'm just like, it lifts my soul. And it's like, what a magical thing. Right. So I think it is kind of fascinating where it's like one song really does something for you, the other one doesn't. And then, or like one song was written like 10 years ago and now this song was ripping it off. I think your average person kind of likes to weigh in and pretend to be like the judge, but yeah, I think it is mostly just, it's a lot of, it makes for good headlines,
Not to be negative, but do you think it's going to get worse?
I think and this is the case with any area of law, like especially in America, where it's like it's the legal world just it's a lot more litigious in America, right? Like people just sue there like crazy, and they all have guns, which is even scarier. But I think again, I mentioned the pendulum. I think it'll swing. I think judges have to be really careful that it doesn't swing too much where it's like, yeah, you get sued if you're using, you know, G or D, C, G, which is like that progression is like in every song, you know? So, but I think at the end of the day, like, well, I guess the real question is, will musicians continue to create original things, you know? And I think they will. Um, I guess arguably, I mean, there's so many songs out there now that like every genre is, you know, like, let's look at rock. Like in the 60s, rock was still kind of new, right? There's like sort of 50s it broke out and 60s was still new. And I guess over time, rock and roll becomes like it's old, right? So maybe there's more chance of repeating ideas. I mean, I don't know. Um, but then I guess in new genres, there's less of that. I mean, because they're new. I guess if I were to make a prediction, there's going to be more of these sort of infringement, plagiarism cases coming up, and then hopefully it hits again, the pendulum starts to come back where it doesn't just all of a sudden become everyone's getting sued all the time, you know?
Yeah, but the issue is with the creation of original music, it's so easy to think you can take any song, for example, and go, oh, this sounds like this, and this band sounds like this band. And then you can easily just trace everything back to cavemen banging sticks on rocks. And it,
And
everything
Buddy
is
Holly.
inspired by something. And it's, once again,
Yeah.
like I said, it's just about that acknowledgement and nothing. You can create original stuff. But when I say create true original music, I mean like you're not going to play a chord that no one's heard before. I'm sure if you trace back all of music history, you can find someone that has played that G with a variant fifth or something like that.
Yeah. No, that's a fair point. And I think, and maybe the pessimist in me thinks that, especially with technology, you can rip things off easier, like from a literal standpoint, like you can actually digitally just rip things off, and that's happening lots in hip hop, of course, like the, you know, sampling or just actually taking something and adjusting it so much that you can claim it as your own without, hopefully without the other person noticing. So the pessimist in me thinks that, and again, people and kids these days, they spend so much, like, you know, do young, say, musicians, for example, do they spend as many hours playing their instruments as, you know, the Beatles did to become as good as the Beatles did? I don't know. I mean, we live in such a connected world and a social media world. Like the pessimist in me thinks that young musicians spend more time on socials than they do playing their instruments, or at least compared to like Led Zeppelin or whatever, right? So is it going to be more tempting to just like lift ideas or not come up with original stuff? I mean, who knows? The optimist in me thinks that the greatest rock band is still out there and it's yet to be made, you know? So, um, yeah, hopefully I'm right on that one.
I think we all hope you're right on that one, Kurt. Kurt, I'm going to wrap things up here now because I know you're a busy man. You got a lot going on. What's next for Kurt? You going to learn to fly a plane, or are you just going to chill with the family? What's going to happen?
Well, I mean, it's, you know, I mean, who knows, but, the music biz is my passion, and, you know, working with young artists and, you know, whether that's as a lawyer or, you know, as a manager down the road, or the SaskMusic thing is amazing. And I'm actually coming to the end of, like, once you've been a president of SaskMusic for 6 years, they force you to step down. So that's coming up soon, like a forced retirement, which is an honor because just to make it that long. So I mean, yeah, after that, who knows? You know, all I can say is that it'll be something to do with the music biz, whatever I'm doing, right? And that's always been my passion, right? And so, yeah, who knows where it'll go.
Who knows where it'll go? Kurt, I want to thank you for taking the time, hanging out with me for a bit. Where can people find you and what you're doing?
Well, thank you. It's been an honor, Matt. Just lawyerdrummer.com or Instagram, just lawyer drummer. Um, yeah, reach out. And usually these sort of interviews create more questions than maybe even answers. So that's good. I mean, if people have questions, to reach out, and as they'll see, I'm quite good at responding.
You are very good at responding. You're actually one of the people that I know is on the ball when it comes to getting back to people quick. So good on you, because I wish I could be better at that. Anyway, Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for checking out another episode of Chat with Matt. I'll be back next week with a new episode. Thank you to Anchor once again for sponsoring this podcast. All right, guys. See you next week. Take it easy.